WN from one side of the baseball side and my dear Orioles series to still celebrating and really talking about all aspects of the Stanley Cup victory of the Washington Capitals and my dear friend Barry Trotz. But it's also football week around here, and I don't mean the soccer shirt that I'm wearing in the World Cup. Joe Flacco is going to be flicking the football around this week, as will Lamar Jackson, and Luke Jones will be there to chronicle all of it. I'll be out there before the end of the week as well. John Harbaugh is going to have a lot to say, and I know we have not talked about the backside of the OTA loss last week. I know John's not happy about that. The organization's not happy about that. The crossfire of the Players Association and everything that's baked into this thing. But this is a pretty big week. This is the first sort of really important getting together and beginning that quest to say, how do we win 10, 11, or 12 games? How do we become a better team in December than we are in June?
Yeah, this is more important than the previous weeks where it was voluntary and you had some guys out there, other guys not out there for a variety of reasons. I still don't want to overstate the importance of mandatory minicamp week. It's still rather inconsequential, but it does provide you a little more context. It is going to be that first time that you have everyone on your football team that's healthy out on the football field practicing, and you start to get a little bit of a better idea of what this team's, how this team's shaping up. You're going to see Terrell Suggs out there. You'll see some other individuals that have missed a day or two of OTAs that's been open to the media. And really, you're just going to be waiting on those guys that are out until training camp, Marshall Yanda and Jimmy Smith and a few others in that regard. But you do get some context. You do get everyone who's healthy out there. And you just, it's that last step as far as the spring goes, final time you're seeing these guys practice only in shorts. And you know that once they wrap up this week, the next time you're seeing them out on the practice field, it's really becoming a real endeavor because it's training camp and you're counting down to the Hall of Fame game then.
Well, what are we expecting? What are we looking for? And I think more than anything, sort of this installation of whatever Lamar Jackson is to be. He's now a football player. He's now a guy with a helmet who has, is the fastest guy on the field, who wants to play quarterback. I don't know what the massaging part of this begins, but I know that, they'll change him, or at least they think they will, and they'll make him something that maybe a quarterback. So I don't know what to say about all this because I've read all the rhetoric and, heard all the interviews and heard all the bad vibes about teams that tried to talk to him about becoming a wide receiver, being an X factor in some sort of an offense. I don't know where that begins or ends and how he's going to look, let's say, like Tyrod Taylor out there as just a quarterback who's taking whatever percentage of the reps there are this week.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves. I mean, what we've seen from the spring, I've written about this, we've talked about this on previous occasions. But anyone who's speculating that Lamar Jackson is going to be beating out Joe Flacco and starting week one, which, you haven't really heard too much of that, but you've heard some national types speak in terms of what happens if the Ravens start 2-4 and the offense is stagnant and what could happen then. Based on what we're seeing in the spring, Lamar Jackson is being treated like a rookie quarterback. He's primarily been working off on a separate field with other rookies, other young players. It's been more Flacco and even a little more Robert Griffin III getting more reps with the first and even the second team. Now, that's not to say that Jackson hasn't been involved. That's not to say that he hasn't gotten some reps, but I think it really speaks to him having a long way to go.
Well, and I would say this. Had they drafted him in the third round or fourth round, and I don't mean him, but whoever he represents, whatever that position represents, whether it had been the kid from Richmond, whoever the guy would have been, I don't think the job's any different beginning today, right? Or because of what his name is or what his speed is or what kind of quarterback he is. It's, hey, you're the backup quarterback and this is the job we have here now, right? Or this is the job we want you to win because he's not even really the backup quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the big question is how far does he progress? How well does he progress? Does he get to a point that they feel 100% comfortable with him as the backup? and then you make a decision on whether you're going to keep RG3. Because, I mean, we know this team hasn't kept 3 quarterbacks since 2009. I think in a perfect world, you'd rather not keep 3 quarterbacks because that's going to be, and maybe it's a little more complicated because I think there is a thought to have Jackson on the field in some regard in a special package of plays. And I don't think it necessarily even means him lining up as a wide receiver. I think it could be more of him as a running back, him as someone who might take a pitch from Joe Flacco and throw a pass then. I think there's other ways to get him on the field without just kind of saying, okay, you're not a quarterback, you're going to play wide receiver, which, I don't even know if he has the hands to be a wide receiver. So I think they're going to get him involved, and I think when you're considering you invested a first-round pick in him and you've given up your second-round pick this year and next year in order to do that, I think there needs to be some thought that you utilize his athleticism because he might have the most explosive athleticism on this roster on either side of the ball. So you'd be crazy not to think of ways to utilize that in the meantime. But in terms of the notion of a quarterback controversy, and I was very critical of this move. I still am very skeptical how you're going to get from point A to point B if he is your quarterback of the future and how you're going to develop him when you don't have oodles and oodles of practice time like you did 30 years ago to develop a young quarterback. But that said, I think where they are right now, it's very clear Flacco's the guy, and how Lamar Jackson comes along, that's going to be more interesting. But it really has been a case where they've had him, in many cases, working on a separate field with other young players who are still learning this offense, still trying to pick up the verbiage, all those different things. And not to say he hasn't made progress. That's not to say that he hasn't been impressive at times. But I think anyone who's been out there watching, you wouldn't misconstrue anything you're seeing for Jackson replacing Flacco being imminent. But that said, it's June, and a lot can happen between now and the start of the season. And I'd even throw this out there as a hypothetical. No one thought Joe Flacco was going to play his rookie year when we were talking about mid-June in 2008. So things can change quickly for a variety of reasons. But based on what we've seen so far, Lamar Jackson has a lot of learning to do, a lot of developing to do before we're having that conversation in a more serious tone.
Luke Jones is our guest right now, and, of course, our Kemosabe for all things Ravens. He's going to be out on the practice fields this week. Some nice mild weather for the most part this week, and a chance to get the 2018 version of the Ravens and the baby birds mixed in, and the OTA situation and what happened and what didn't happen. I know John Harbaugh paid a $50,000 fine, and the league is aware, and the Players Association. You wrote a piece about it last week. I know for a fact that there were many fuming out in Owings Mills about this and the perception that they're cheating or pushing the envelope. Luke, all I know is this keeps happening, and
yeah.
I don't know whose fault it is or where the rules are, but to your point, they would all love to practice more. They would all love to get more out of their players. That's not the tenor of where this is. That's not where the president of our country is taking it with his comments. That's not where the knee is. That's not where the players' minds are. I think this is far more indicative of a much, much larger war we're going to see amongst the players and the owners and management and, quite frankly, a racial divide in the league. And that's just a fact. That's happening.
Yeah, I don't know how much I'm tying that into this. This is the third time the Ravens have gotten caught in the last, 8 years? At some point in time, you have to look at what you're doing and say, at the very least, you're kind of falling into that category of being that habitual line stepper, where you're right in that gray area every time. And if you're in that gray area, guess what? You're going to get caught. Now, I'll say this much. I think when you look at what happened back in 2010, it was a very clear cut. I even found an article from BaltimoreRavens.com at the time that Ozzie Newsome flat out said, yeah, we agree with the league's action here. We deserve to be penalized.
Right, yeah.
We got caught. 2 years ago when John Harbaugh mysteriously elected to try to put rookies in pads for a special teams drill, even though that was, at that point, the 4th or 5th year of this current CBA, and he had never tried to do that before, to our knowledge. He got caught, and they got in trouble, and he took full accountability. In this case, you saw the lengthy statements from Harbaugh and Ozzie Newsome. Very clear, John Harbaugh spoke about this being overzealous contact during pass coverage. Didn't name names, but alluded to the fact that rookies are still learning how to practice, and basically put it on that. Now, is there gray area for this? Sure. Because if you look at the CBA, I mean, it says that there's no contact, but at the same time, these guys aren't in force fields. You know what I mean? Like, they're not all wearing bubbles when they practice. So you're going to have some of this. But that said, it's still not a good look. It's still a case of what kind of tone, what kind of temperature are you setting for OTAs, which are supposed to be strictly about learning, and it's really not supposed to be that setting where guys are competing to the point where they're making contact. Now, that said, I'm guessing you could probably go around to the 32 teams every spring, and if you're really monitoring this closely, and all these teams have to film practice, and the league can review this stuff, so if everyone is under the microscope, probably as much as the Ravens have been as a repeat offender, they're probably going to get popped, and they probably could get caught and lose a couple days of OTAs and be subject to a fine. But when you have been an offender before, and this is something that you've been guilty of in the past to some degree, even if it's a slightly different situation, you're going to be under the microscope. And in the case of the Ravens, it's a bad look because you do have a general manager and a coach who've been there a really long time, who should know every detail of the CBA and understand what's okay and what's not. And it's tough to look at this and say, how did this happen again? When it just happened 2 years ago in a slightly different setting, but still the same result of losing some OTAs. So do I think this is a really big deal in the big picture? No. I don't think the Ravens losing 2 OTAs the first week of June is going to drastically alter their fate for the 2018 season. But that said, this is something that you do ask, why does this keep happening? They received a fine. The report from NFL Network was Harbaugh $50,000 and the organization $100,000, which, if you look under the rules of the CBA, isn't the maximum penalty that they can receive. So that speaks to maybe there being more of a gray area here, but it's just something you don't want to deal with, and it's something that you feel should be avoided. And I will say this, and I'll say this in defense of John Harbaugh. Going back a couple weeks ago during OTAs, there was one point in time, and I can't remember who the wide receiver was. I believe the defensive back was Tony Jefferson, and Harbaugh even made a comment that it's okay if you let him make the catch here. And clearly in that context, you're not going to hear that in the regular season or in a game or in training camp, but I think that does speak to wanting to avoid contact, wanting to avoid a situation where, one, you're violating the CBA, and two, you're putting players in danger. So maybe at that point, maybe the whistle had been blown by someone at that point, or maybe they had gotten word already at that point that they were in jeopardy of being disciplined. But it does speak to there being some level of being cognizant of that. But at the same time, I can't just absolve the Ravens just because they think that they were being treated unfairly, or you'd be seeing 20 different teams getting in trouble every spring, and that just hasn't been the case. It's been the Ravens, it's been Seattle, and New England's gotten in trouble for other things other than OTAs, but it's kind of been the same handful of teams that have gotten in trouble for this, and the Ravens have been a repeat offender, so it's tough to have too much sympathy for them under that context.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Busy week for you, right? I mean, you got baseball in town all week, even though the games don't matter as much, and certainly football this week. This is the busiest week, along with the U.S. Open and everything else going on with the Stanley Cup. It's been a crazy, crazy busy week. But, I guess the focus off the Ravens, at least for me over the last month, I'm doing my Dear Orioles series, which I know you and I are going to be getting more involved in here over the next 6 weeks. as they deal Machado. But on the Ravens front, this is it. This is the end for a little while. And all evaluations off of these 4 days, fairly or unfairly, getting the team together, I would say everything's about what's happening on the offense, right? Like who's snapping where, who's going to be the center, who's going to play where, who are these wide receivers, who's in shape, who's not, who's dropping the ball, who's catching the ball, who's catching on, what rookie will impress somebody, because there'll be one, and it won't probably be Lamar Jackson, quite frankly. It'll probably be somebody we haven't talked a whole lot about who sort of, hey, maybe that kid can get on the field for us in September or October. All of that sort of happens over the next couple of days, right?
It will, and there'll be a lot of overreaction. There'll be a lot of guys that we talk about that come the end of the preseason are either non-factors or have already been cut or something along those lines. There'll be some guys that we talk about now that are going to get hurt the first week of training camp. I mean, it's inevitable, but for where we are right now, sure, there's plenty of interest in what this offense is going to look like. We've already talked at great length about the center position, and we'll continue to, whether it's Matt Skura, whether it's Alex Lewis, who the second week of OTAs actually got a real living, breathing look at the center spot after so much speculation the last couple years. So
the feeling is he's too big to be a center, right? I mean, literally.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of like the general, that's kind of the general thought. I mean, when you're talking about the center position, you have to have a low center of gravity. You have to be able to anchor. You can't give ground in the way that when you're an offensive tackle, you can give ground because that's how the pocket develops. So there is a notion that you don't want your center to be too tall and you want them to have a low center of gravity, but at the same time, the Ravens, with their current system in place that they implemented last year with D'Alessandris and Greg Roman, is much more about physicality and size. So from that standpoint, you might look at Alex Lewis and say, you do want a little bit of a bigger center rather than, the Jeremy Zuda type of the past. Or, there's questions about how solid of an anchor Matt Skura can provide and not giving ground. And in the case of Lewis, he's 6'6", and that's taller than your typical center. But that said, you have a 6'6" quarterback, so I think that's a little bit less of an issue than if you had a 6-foot quarterback and you had a 6'6" center, where you might be saying that could be a little problematic from a pocket standpoint. So we'll see. I mean, Lewis has to prove that first of all, he's got to prove he can stay on the field. I mean, my goodness, as much as we're kind of singing his potential, and I like the kid a lot, and I think he played well his rookie year, but you're talking about someone who's missed over a season and a half of 2 seasons so far. So he's got to prove he can stay on the field, and he's got to prove he can handle the aspects of the job that, frankly, he just hasn't had a lot of experience with. I mean, Matt Skura, at the very least, is someone who practiced as a center last summer and his rookie year when he was on the practice squad. And, I mean, he's someone who has a little more of a pedigree there, whereas Lewis has been more of a offensive tackle and guard to this point in his football life. So I think that's going to be interesting. Certainly there's going to be a lot of attention on the wide receiver position and the offense in general. But on the flip side, I'll throw this out there with the defense. And I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to glean this week from this, but all we've heard from the likes of Eric Weddle and Terrell Suggs and C.J. Mosley and a slew of younger players is the amount of freedom and flexibility they're going to have to adjust things on the fly under Wink Martindale, which, you know what? That sounds great in the spring. That sounds great in the summer. But when the bullets are flying for real, do you really have the trust in your players on the field to make adjustments or to make changes on the fly? Or do you run the risk of absolutely having some blown coverages and blown assignments when you try to get too cute with some of that stuff? So I think
I've seen Eric Weddle freelance once before. It cost the team a game. Literally. And that doesn't make anybody happy, including Eric Weddle. Right.
So I think, it's always easy to point the finger at someone who's not here anymore. And there have been plenty of implications on, Dean Pease not doing a good job. No one's come out and said that directly, but he's the one guy who's gone. I mean, I don't think anyone's talking about Ladarius Webb, and Webb's the only guy who played a snap for this defense last year that's not on the roster anymore. So I think it's really easy to and this happens everywhere. Anytime there's a new coordinator, new coach, any person who's making decisions is no longer there. There tends to be, And I think sometimes it's subconscious. I don't think anyone's trying to throw peas under the bus necessarily, but I think there tends to be this is going to be better than the way we used to do it. And maybe it will be. And if it is, and the Ravens are a top 3 defense this year, then great. And there are things I really like about Wink Martindale, but I think there are also some legitimate questions there. And it's great to give Eric Weddle those responsibilities. It's great to give Terrell Suggs and C.J. Mosley those responsibilities to maybe adjust a call based on the personnel you see on the field. But that said, what happens if Eric Weddle leaves the game with a sprained ankle? What happens if Terrell Suggs suffers a concussion? What happens if C.J. Mosley hurts his hamstring and isn't in there, and then you have someone else in there? What are you doing then? Are you going back to a more conservative format, or are you then letting a less experienced player make a decision in some of those instances, and you're going to be caught out of position? So, we'll see. It's not a criticism. It's much more a case of I am really intrigued to see how it's going to look. Again, I don't think we're going to learn anything dramatic or conclusive from this week, but that's one thing that I'm kind of curious to see how it looks on the defensive side of the ball, because from a continuity standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, there's as much continuity as you're going to have in the salary cap era. So that should be a plus. It's going to be interesting to see what fingerprints Martindale puts on this defense overall.
All of our WNST Ravens coverage brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast, the tasty coffee, the best fried chicken in the land. I've got the cup right here in the Kona blend. Make sure you're using the app when you're pumping the gas. You'll get your Western fries, your fried chicken free of charge. And I found out that the Royal Farms on Nursery Road outside of BWI has delicious, fresh fried chicken even at 1 a.m. I've landed on a couple of late flights this week, and I've needed a little ROFO fix, so make sure you're checking that out. Big appreciation to Frank Schilling and Ed Stronsky and everybody over at Royal Farms for sponsoring all that we do around here. Also, Cole Roofing, we all felt that March wind blowing in, and we got the rains going in after that. Now here we are, summer's coming, and we're getting the hot days. Cole Roofing, never let a goof on your roof. You need the professionals, especially if you have a corporate or commercial roof space. Bill Cole's going to be here this week talking some Oriole baseball with me as I move into my Dear Orioles series. I've also got my Cole Roofing mug on the Facebook Live TV right now, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Cole Roofing and Pfister Energy, they also do green spaces and do really cool James Bond stuff on roofs. By the way, the roof next to the building where I am downtown has a green space, so something to consider if you have a corporate or commercial roof space. Cole Roofing does that kind of work as well as Pfister Energy and Cole Roofing. We'll tell you more about that later on in the week. Luke, I want to go back to the offense and who's going to catch the ball and who are these wide receivers and, Crabtree, and we've done a couple of pressers with him now. Anything about any of this that stands out as sort of potential or something that you love in the framework of the offense? Maybe nothing more to love than Hayden Hurst, right? Like that if he can become that, sort of Todd Heap, that Dennis Spitta, that guy that catches the ball a lot, that acts as that Band-Aid in this kind of an offense at this point in Joe Flacco's career, that can really change things if he's pretty good and the other guys are just serviceable Mike Wallacey kind of wide receivers. I know somebody needs to step up. My nickel's probably on the tight end.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because history tells us if you're counting on a rookie tight end, you're going to get your feelings hurt, and it's probably not going to be good. That said, in most cases, you don't have teams bringing in a rookie tight end to be the guy from day one. Typically it's a case like Todd Heap in 2001. Shannon Sharp was still the starter, and Shannon Sharp was still, maybe not in his prime, but was still a really productive player. So you don't have as much pressure in that standpoint. But I think in the case of the Ravens, when you look at Hayden Hurst, when you look at even Mark Andrews, I'll throw him in there as well, you need some playmaking ability from the tight end position. Nick Boyle's a fine blocker. Max Williams has never lived up to his second-round billing, and I think the knee injury and subsequent surgery is a big reason why there. But he's been a pretty good blocker. So you have guys who can do that. You need guys who can catch the football and make plays. And I think what we've seen from Hurst, and probably to a little lesser degree Andrews, but he certainly has had his moments too in the 2 OTA practices the media has been able to see. Let's just keep that in mind because it's a really small sampling. You certainly see what the Ravens like there. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one thing to talk about Michael Crabtree or John Brown or go down the list, Willie Snead, or the rookie wide receivers they drafted in the 4th and 5th round, or Chris Moore. I mean, we're going to talk about Brashad Perriman until he's no longer on this roster, which I have my doubts of whether we're going to see him even make it through the preseason. But I think for Joe Flacco to be successful, for this offense to be more consistent and to stay on schedule, it's always been when they've had a productive tight end, whether it was Todd Heap, whether it was Dennis Pitta, whether it was Owen Daniels, they had someone that they could really count on those third down situations and to move the chains and to be a factor in the red zone. And they really haven't had that. And Ben Watson had a nice season last year, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm tearing him down because he was coming back from an Achilles, and certainly he had some nice production, but you never really felt like he was a go-to guy.
He wasn't going to be a difference maker, that's for sure.
Yeah, he was just kind of there. And he was their best receiving tight end. So I don't want to make it sound like he was a scrub either, but you never really felt like he was dangerous, that the other team was going to have to account for him. We'll see if Hayden Hurst can be that guy. Again, I'm skeptical that he's going to be their leading receiver or anything crazy like that as a rookie, but can he be a more productive rookie tight end than what you typically find? And that's probably going to be a major key for this team in 2018. I have some confidence that Michael Crabtree can come in and maybe not be a 1,000-yard receiver because he hasn't really done that all that often in his career. But can he have 850 yards and catch 7 touchdowns and be reliable on third down and in the red zone? Yeah, I think Crabtree can do that. John Brown, we'll see if he's healthy. I think he's the kind of guy who could pop, but at the very least, I think he could give them some production. Same thing with Willie Snead. So I think there's potential there to be a competent group of wide receivers, even if you're counting on guys to bounce back. But they need someone to emerge at the tight end position to really be somewhat, at least a decent playmaker for them. If not, and it kind of follows those two rookies follow the script of what we often see in the NFL, then I think you're going to see this look like dysfunctional would be too strong, but I think you're going to see this passing game struggle and be really inconsistent in the ways that we've seen it over the last couple of years. So, I like Hurst. Certainly they love him. He's a guy that they took in the first round, even with designs of wanting to nab Lamar Jackson. They still took Hurst before Jackson, so it probably should speak to how much they like Hurst. But, again, you like everything on paper about him. He's 6'3", 250 pounds, has really soft hands. But, again, how quickly can he get himself
Well, the issue for
acclimated?
him is that he is a grown-up. You know what I mean? This isn't a 20-year-old kid
Sure.
who brought his mom over, and he's trying to figure things out. This is a guy who played minor league baseball. I don't know if you read the Dan Pompei piece on him, but it's just fabulous.
Yeah.
I read it on one of the plane rides when I wasn't bitching about the Orioles and writing about hugging the Stanley Cup and being up all night with it. But, I have high expectations for him. I think this is a really important pick for them, and I think he showed me in a little bit of time of talking to him that this isn't going to be too big for him. He's not shocked that he's walking into an NFL facility, and this isn't the first time that he's walked down the hallway from, Andrew McCutcheon or something. You know what I mean?
Right. And, that's certainly something that should be in his favor. And look, you can look at it on the flip side and say, well, he's going to be 25 this summer. Is his ceiling a little bit more limited than some other guys that might come into the league at age 21? I don't know, maybe. But at the same time, I think there's an argument to be made that he reaches his potential more quickly than someone who's 21. So that that kind of goes back to what I said about rookie tight ends and how they typically struggle as they enter the NFL. You hope maybe he can avoid some of that because the Ravens need him. If you're going to sit here and say, hypothetically speaking, that Hayden Hurst has a disappointing season as a rookie, then that's a really bad sign for this offense. So they need him, and they're going to need him to, he doesn't have to go out there and catch 70 balls, but, can he go out there and catch 50, and can he help move the chains, and can he catch 6 5, maybe not 6, maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns for you, and be a reliable third down target. And can he do all those things in concert with those wide receivers I mentioned bouncing back? And if that happens, I don't think this passing game's great, but I think it can be good enough under that context, and be in a position where they're winning 10 games and getting back into the playoffs, and who knows what happens after that. But it's tough to put that much pressure on a rookie, but when you consider the need at the tight end position, they need Hayden Hurst to step forward and be a contributor. And if you get him and Mark Andrews to do it, then you got something there. Then you have some real intrigue with that portion of the passing game. But long way to go, and certainly both those rookies, lots of potential, lots of things to like, but a long way to go to prove it.
We will be hearing from all sorts of Ravens all week long in the afterglow of the Stanley Cup champion Washington Capitals. The Orioles are hosting the Red Sox. The U.S. Open is in Shinnecock this week, and we'll be talking to Robert Kennedy about that down at Compass Point Golf as well. It is a busy, busy time around here. Ravens passing camp, mini camp, all the guys out. This is the big week, and hopefully no more fines and problems with taking practices away as well. Luke wrote about that last week. He'll be writing about the real practices this week, and we'll be commenting throughout the week out on our Facebook and our Twitter. The BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. If you want to listen to any of our post-caps coverage, I'm doing tons of stuff there, tons of content out in the BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault about all sorts of things, including the Justify Triple Crown victory as well as my Dear Orioles series. Nasty at WNST.net finds me, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.